Somewhere right now, two people are asking two different AI systems the exact same question about money. One gets caution, the other gets asymmetry. One gets consensus, the other gets possibility. 10 years from now, those two people may not end up living in the same economic reality.
And that is the shift almost nobody fully understands yet. People still think the AI race is about building the smartest chatbot, better answers, better writing, better coding, but underneath the surface, something much bigger is happening. These companies are not actually building the same thing anymore. They're building different versions of intelligence itself.
And the divergence is already structural. Different AI ecosystems operate under different incentives, infrastructure constraints, regulatory pressure, political environments, and business models. Those forces naturally push the systems toward different optimization behavior over time.
Which means eventually these systems may not simply answer questions differently. They may slowly shape how people interpret risk, opportunity, truth, safety, power, and even reality itself.
One ecosystem wants to become the operating system for work. Another wants to become the safest intelligence layer for governments and institutions. Another wants intelligence to spread everywhere at near zero cost. Another wants speed, openness, and unrestricted exploration. Those are not product differences. Those are competing philosophies about the future of civilization.
And most people are drifting into one of these ecosystems without realizing it through workplace adoption, through convenience, through default integrations, through the tools their friends and companies already use. Quietly, gradually.
Which is historically how infrastructure systems become dominant. At first, they appear optional and interchangeable. Over time, they become embedded into workflows, institutions, communication patterns, and economic coordination itself.
Think about social media for a second. At first, platforms looked harmless, just communication tools, entertainment. But eventually, they shaped politics, emotional behavior, attention spans, cultural incentives, and how millions of people interpreted reality itself. Now imagine something much more powerful than a social feed. Systems actively participating in reasoning itself.
Because AI systems are starting to move beyond information retrieval. They are becoming synthesis systems, decision systems, coordination systems, systems that summarize complexity, prioritize information, recommend actions, and increasingly influence what humans notice or ignore.
And once intelligence becomes infrastructure for decisions, the economic implications become extremely large. Organizations begin adapting around the intelligence layer they use every day. Workflows adapt. Coordination structures adapt. Strategic behavior adapts.
Which is why the benchmark obsession is already becoming outdated. People still ask, which AI is smartest? That is the old question. The new question is much more dangerous. Which intelligence system quietly shapes your worldview over long periods of time?
Because intelligence is never neutral. Every intelligence system reflects incentives, business models, risk tolerances, governance structures, assumptions about what humans should prioritize.
One system may slowly train users toward caution and institutional thinking. Another may reward exploratory thinking and asymmetry. Another may optimize behavior around ecosystem dependency and invisible convenience. Over time, those differences compound economically.
Especially once AI systems become integrated into higher leverage environments like finance, research, law, logistics, software development, and organizational coordination. In those environments, small differences in reasoning behavior can compound significantly over long time horizons.
This is why the future AI race may not ultimately be won by the system that appears smartest today. It may be won by the intelligent civilization whose philosophy becomes most deeply embedded into how humans work, think, invest, and coordinate reality itself.
And honestly, that is what makes this moment so strange. Most people still think they're choosing a tool, but increasingly, they are choosing a cognitive environment.
The future may not become one unified intelligence serving humanity equally. It may fragment into multiple rival intelligence civilizations, each optimized for different ideas about truth, freedom, safety, speed, coordination, and power.
And fragmentation is already beginning. Different systems already produce different synthesis patterns, filtering behavior, risk tolerance, and strategic recommendations. Those differences appear small today, but small differences compound once billions of people and millions of organizations begin building around them.
Which means the most important technology shift of this decade may not simply be artificial intelligence. It may be the silent fragmentation of intelligence itself.
And the people who understand that early may gain one of the largest leverage advantages of the entire intelligence age. Right now, most people still evaluate AI systems the same way they evaluate smartphones. Which one is faster? Which one sounds smarter? Which one scores highest on benchmarks? And honestly, that feels logical. Even businesses still think this way. But the problem is that the benchmark mindset is already becoming outdated because intelligence itself is rapidly becoming commoditized.
Yeah, every few months somebody catches up. A new model appears. Benchmarks jump again. Features spread across the market almost instantly, which means the real competition is moving somewhere deeper. Not capability, incentives. Because once models become good enough, the important question is no longer who has the smartest AI. It becomes, what is this intelligence system optimized to do over time?
And the optimization pressures are very different across ecosystems. Some companies can subsidize enormous AI costs because they already control cloud infrastructure, enterprise software, advertising networks, or operating systems. Others depend heavily on subscriptions, API access, or ecosystem growth. Those economic realities influence how the intelligence evolves. A system optimized for enterprise survivability behaves differently from a system optimized for rapid experimentation or engagement growth.
This is why benchmarks alone become misleading. A benchmark tells you how a model performs inside a controlled test environment. It does not tell you what incentives shape the system. It does not tell you how aggressively the system filters risk. It does not tell you how the model behaves under political pressure, regulatory pressure, or economic stress. And it definitely does not tell you how the system may influence your decisions once it becomes deeply integrated into your workflows.
Exactly. Because imagine two systems that appear equally intelligent on paper. One is optimized primarily for institutional trust and regulatory survival. The other is optimized for speed, openness, and unrestricted exploration. At first, the differences may feel subtle, but over time, they produce completely different outcomes. One system may aggressively avoid controversial conclusions or asymmetric narratives because the downside risk is too high. Another may tolerate uncertainty and discomfort in exchange for faster discovery and rawer information flows. Neither system is neutral.
And this becomes incredibly important once AI starts participating in higher leverage decisions. Financial analysis, market interpretation, business strategy, scientific research, legal reasoning, geopolitical analysis. In those environments, the philosophy embedded into the intelligence system starts mattering as much as the intelligence itself.
Because AI systems increasingly behave more like economic organisms than static software tools. They adapt around incentives, around regulation, around access to compute, around survival pressures. A company trying to secure enterprise adoption may optimize heavily around predictability and compliance. A company optimizing around ecosystem expansion may prioritize integration and user dependency. A company optimizing around real-time engagement may prioritize speed and attention capture.
And that's where the benchmark mindset completely collapses, because suddenly you realize the AI systems are not competing to answer questions better. They're competing to shape workflows, habits, defaults, decisions, entire economic environments. One ecosystem wants to become indispensable to corporations. Another wants to become the default coordination layer for digital life. Another wants to become the fastest intelligence network on the internet. Those are infrastructure ambitions, not product ambitions.
Think about what happened with browsers during the early internet era. Most people thought browsers were simply tools for viewing websites, but eventually browsers became gateways controlling search traffic, advertising flows, default behaviors, and massive economic ecosystems. AI systems are evolving into something even more powerful: cognitive gateways, systems sitting between humans and information itself.
And once intelligence becomes infrastructure, the economics start changing very quickly. Running advanced AI systems requires enormous amounts of compute power, energy, cooling infrastructure, and specialized chips. Some companies can absorb those costs more easily because they already control hyperscale cloud infrastructure or dominant software ecosystems. Others cannot. That creates structural pressure toward very different business models and strategic behavior.
Which means eventually the AI race stops looking like who has the best chatbot and starts looking like who controls the deepest layer of human coordination. Because if an intelligent system becomes integrated into search, documents, workflows, communication, scheduling, investing, research, and autonomous agents, then it gradually becomes the environment inside which decisions happen. And that is an insanely powerful position.
This is why the future winners may not necessarily be the systems with the highest benchmark scores. They may be the systems that integrate most deeply into daily life while quietly shaping how people work, prioritize, and interpret reality. That is a completely different competition.
And honestly, most users are still playing the old game. They ask, which model is smartest? Meanwhile, the real game is becoming which intelligence ecosystem gains the deepest behavioral dependency. That is where the asymmetry starts getting dangerous.
Because dependency compounds. Organizations adapt around their intelligence layer. Workflows adapt. Habits adapt. Coordination structures adapt. Over time, leaving an ecosystem becomes increasingly expensive, not just technically, but cognitively and operationally. That is why integration matters so much more than most people realize.
And once you see that, it becomes impossible to think about AI the same way again. The real asymmetry is no longer access to intelligence. Almost everyone will eventually have access. The real asymmetry becomes understanding the incentives behind the intelligence you rely on every day.
Because different intelligence systems are quietly optimizing for different versions of the future, different definitions of safety, different definitions of truth, different definitions of acceptable risk. And eventually, those differences may shape entire economies.
Which means the benchmark era may ultimately become the least important phase of the AI race. Because the real battle is not over intelligence quality alone. It is over who controls the cognitive infrastructure underneath modern civilization. Most people still talk about AI systems like software products, different apps, different interfaces, different subscriptions, but that framing is becoming increasingly misleading. Because the largest AI ecosystems are starting to behave less like tools and more like emerging civilizations of intelligence, each with its own worldview, its own survival strategy, its own philosophy of power.
And once you start looking at them this way, their behavior suddenly makes a lot more sense. Because these systems are not just competing technically, they're competing philosophically. One ecosystem wants deep institutional trust. Another wants unrestricted exploration. Another wants invisible integration into daily life. Another wants global open source scale. These are fundamentally different visions of what intelligence should become.
And the divergence is already structural. The ecosystems operate under different incentives, governance models, infrastructure constraints, and regulatory environments. Those forces shape how the systems evolve over time. Even if the models appear similar at the interface layer, the underlying optimization pressures are very different.
The first civilization is what you could call the universal operator, the ecosystem trying to become the operating system for human productivity itself. Writing, research, coding, scheduling, analysis, workflow coordination. Eventually, entire companies may operate through this intelligence layer.
And that is an insanely powerful position. Because once an intelligence system becomes deeply embedded into how people work every day, leaving becomes painful. The AI stops feeling optional. It starts feeling infrastructural, which means the real moat is no longer intelligence quality alone. It becomes dependency, workflow dependency, cognitive dependency, organizational dependency.
And enterprise integration strengthens that effect. Once businesses standardize around an intelligence layer, the system becomes deeply connected to internal workflows, documents, communication, compliance, and operational behavior. The switching costs become much larger than most people expect.
The second civilization is very different. This is the constitutional guardian. The ecosystem optimized around safety, predictability, and institutional trust. Its philosophy is not about moving fastest. It is about being trusted inside environments where mistakes are extremely expensive. Finance, law, medicine, government, enterprise coordination.
Which sounds less exciting on the surface, but honestly, it may become one of the most economically important intelligence layers in the world. Because large institutions do not primarily optimize for innovation. They optimize for survivability. And survivability rewards systems that behave predictably under pressure.
Especially once regulation intensifies. Institutions operating under legal liability, compliance obligations, and governance oversight naturally prefer systems optimized for reliability and controlled behavior. That creates a completely different evolutionary pressure than systems competing primarily for speed or open experimentation.
Then you have the ecosystem governor. This civilization understands something extremely important. Intelligence becomes more powerful when it disappears into the background. Not flashy, not dramatic, invisible. Embedded into search, email, documents, browsers, operating systems, cloud infrastructure, and communication tools.
Which is honestly one of the scariest models, because users may slowly become dependent on intelligence systems they barely notice using. Their workflows adapt, their assumptions adapt, their decision-making adapts. Eventually, the ecosystem itself becomes difficult to escape because it quietly shaped the environment underneath daily life.
And ecosystem integration creates compounding advantages. Search feeds productivity. Productivity feeds workflow coordination. Workflow coordination feeds organizational dependency. Organizational dependency feeds long-term retention. The infrastructure becomes increasingly self-reinforcing over time.
Then comes the rebellious truth seeker. Fast, provocative, real-time, less filtered, more willing to explore uncomfortable narratives and asymmetric interpretations. This ecosystem intentionally moves toward areas other systems often avoid.
And that creates both enormous opportunity and enormous danger, because some of the most valuable information in markets, geopolitics, and technological disruption appears first at the edges, in uncertainty. In places where institutional systems hesitate, systems optimized for unrestricted exploration may detect asymmetries faster, but they may also amplify instability, manipulation, and narrative chaos.
Which creates a very different optimization structure. Systems designed for exploratory speed prioritize different trade-offs than systems designed for institutional reliability. Neither approach is neutral. They simply optimize around different assumptions about risk and value creation.
And finally, you have the open source swarm, the civilization attempting to distribute intelligence everywhere. Open models, global experimentation, local deployment, decentralized development. At first glance, this looks deeply democratic.
But underneath that openness sits something much more disruptive. Because once intelligence becomes globally distributed at near zero marginal cost, the value of proprietary intelligence starts collapsing toward commodity pricing. That threatens the economic moat of centralized ecosystems completely.
And open ecosystems shift where value accumulates. Instead of capturing value primarily through model access, value flows toward infrastructure, distribution, hardware, orchestration, and physical deployment layers. Open systems also create much faster experimentation cycles because innovation becomes globally distributed rather than centrally controlled.
But open intelligence also creates darker possibilities. Once powerful models become widely distributed, controlling downstream use becomes almost impossible. The same systems enabling innovation can also enable cyber attacks, propaganda systems, automated manipulation, and decentralized intelligence weaponization.
Which creates one of the strangest paradoxes of the AI age. The democratization of intelligence and the weaponization of intelligence may become the same process viewed from different angles.
And now the real shape of the AI race starts becoming visible. These are not simply companies building competing products. These are competing intelligence civilizations optimizing for different ideas about safety, freedom, trust, integration, openness, coordination, and power itself.
One ecosystem optimizes for institutional trust. another for workflow integration, another for exploratory speed, another for distributed experimentation, another for invisible ecosystem control. Over time, those differences may shape entirely different economic and social environments.
Which means the future AI wars may not be won by the system that appears smartest today. They may be won by the intelligent civilization whose philosophy becomes most deeply embedded into how humans work, invest, coordinate, and interpret reality itself.
And that may become one of the defining shifts of the intelligence age. The models are no longer converging. They are diverging into different cognitive worlds, different economic systems, different ideas about what intelligence should ultimately become. Imagine a real financial panic. Markets falling fast, conflicting information everywhere, liquidity disappearing, rumors spreading faster than facts, millions of people asking AI systems the same question at the same time. What is happening? What should I do? What matters? And suddenly the philosophy behind the intelligence system matters a lot more than people expected.
Because one system may respond with extreme caution, consensus, institutional safety, verified information only. Another may aggressively explore second-order effects, hidden asymmetries, and uncomfortable possibilities before consensus forms. Those are not small differences anymore. During real uncertainty, those differences can shape fortunes, careers, entire strategic decisions.
Especially because uncertainty environments amplify optimization behavior. Systems optimized heavily around institutional reliability naturally prioritize stability and risk minimization. Systems optimized around exploratory reasoning naturally tolerate more ambiguity and unconventional interpretation. Those differences become much more visible during periods of stress.
And that is why the AI debate is quietly becoming a trust war, not simply a technology race. A trust war. Which systems humans rely on when reality becomes unstable? Which systems governments standardize around? Which systems businesses trust with high-leverage decisions? Which systems individuals depend on during uncertainty?
Because honestly, everybody eventually reaches the same question. Which AI would you actually trust with your money during a real crisis? Not during a benchmark test, not during a product demo, during fear, during confusion, during uncertainty.
One intelligent system may protect you from catastrophic mistakes. Another may protect you from missing asymmetric opportunities hiding inside chaos. One system may reduce instability. Another may increase discovery. Both contain value, and both contain danger.
Because these ecosystems optimize around different failure modes. Safety-oriented systems prioritize predictability, compliance, and institutional survivability. Exploratory systems prioritize speed, openness, and unconventional reasoning pathways. Those optimization pressures naturally produce different strategic behavior over time.
And this is where the conversation becomes emotionally uncomfortable. Because eventually you realize there is probably no perfectly neutral intelligence system waiting at the end of this race. Every system reflects incentives, political pressure, business pressure, regulatory pressure, economic survival pressure.
Which means intelligence itself is starting to fragment philosophically. One ecosystem believes too much openness destabilizes society. Another believes too much filtering weakens civilization. One side fears chaos. The other fears control. One side fears misinformation. The other fears censorship.
And the tension is structurally difficult to solve because both risks are real simultaneously. Increasing openness increases exploratory range and adaptability, but also increases volatility and manipulation risk. Increasing safety improves reliability, but may reduce responsiveness and asymmetry detection under uncertainty.
Which means eventually the future AI divide may not simply separate smart systems from less smart systems. It may separate civilizations making different trade-offs about truth, freedom, safety, and acceptable uncertainty.
Think about what that means economically for a second. Imagine two investors during a rapidly changing geopolitical crisis. One relies heavily on highly filtered institutional intelligence systems. The other relies on exploratory systems optimized for unconventional signal detection and asymmetric interpretation. Over time, those environments may produce completely different opportunity maps.
Especially during periods where consensus information lags behind rapidly changing conditions. Systems prioritizing exploratory interpretation may identify emerging patterns earlier, while systems prioritizing institutional validation may reduce exposure to false positives and destabilizing misinformation.
And honestly, this is where people start feeling the emotional tension underneath the episode. Because nobody wants to be manipulated by reckless systems, but nobody wants to become cognitively trapped inside overly filtered systems either.
Which means the future intelligence economy may partially revolve around trust calibration, not blind trust, calibration. Understanding which systems optimize for what environments, what risks, and what forms of uncertainty.
And organizations will likely diverge accordingly. Highly regulated sectors may increasingly adopt intelligence systems optimized around compliance and institutional trust. Competitive and decentralized environments may move towards systems optimized around adaptability and exploratory reasoning.
Which means different AI civilizations may eventually produce different economic cultures, different risk appetites, different innovation speeds, different strategic behavior, different definitions of acceptable truth.
And this may become one of the defining tensions of the intelligence age. The systems protecting society from instability may also suppress some forms of discovery. The systems maximizing freedom and exploration may also increase chaos and manipulation risk.
Historically, coordination systems often involve trade-offs between adaptability and stability. Intelligence ecosystems appear increasingly subject to similar structural dynamics as they scale into larger operational and institutional environments.
And meanwhile, most people still think this conversation is about chatbots. That is the crazy part. The real battle is about cognitive infrastructure. Which systems shape interpretation during uncertainty? Which systems influence strategic behavior? Which systems become trusted enough to guide billions of decisions every single day?
Because once intelligence becomes infrastructure for thought itself, the philosophy embedded into these systems stops being abstract. It becomes economic reality.
And the people who understand that early may gain a massive advantage. Not because they found the smartest AI, but because they learned how different intelligence systems behave under pressure before the rest of the world realized the game had already changed.
Most people still think the AI race is happening inside chat windows, better prompts, better models, better answers. But underneath every AI response sits an enormous physical machine civilization that almost nobody sees. Data centers, semiconductor factories, fiber networks, cooling systems, electrical grids, power plants. Intelligence at planetary scale is not abstract anymore. It is industrial.
And honestly, this is where the whole thing starts feeling less like Silicon Valley and more like the early construction of a new world order. Because suddenly, the important question is not which chatbot sounds smartest. The real question becomes who controls the infrastructure underneath machine intelligence itself.
Advanced AI systems require massive amounts of compute capacity, electricity, networking bandwidth, cooling infrastructure, and specialized semiconductor supply chains. As systems scale, infrastructure constraints increasingly shape what becomes economically and operationally possible.
Which is why major technology companies are behaving differently now. They are signing long-term energy agreements, building hyperscale compute clusters, negotiating directly with governments, securing semiconductor access years in advance. Some are even discussing nuclear energy partnerships to support future AI demand.
Think about how crazy that is for a second. Software companies are now talking about power generation infrastructure. That is not normal technology behavior. That is civilization infrastructure behavior.
And the bottlenecks are real. Advanced semiconductor manufacturing remains highly concentrated geographically. High-end AI accelerators require specialized fabrication processes, packaging systems, networking infrastructure, and global logistics coordination. Those dependencies create strategic vulnerability across the ecosystem.
Which means compute is quietly becoming geopolitical power. Countries understand this already. Governments understand this already. Because eventually intelligence infrastructure may influence economic competitiveness, scientific acceleration, military capability, industrial productivity, and national coordination capacity simultaneously.
Which is why the AI race increasingly resembles an arms race for industrial cognition. Export controls, chip restrictions, sovereign AI programs, strategic compute alliances. Governments are starting to treat advanced intelligence infrastructure the same way previous generations treated oil, telecommunications, or nuclear capability.
Infrastructure concentration also shapes ecosystem behavior. Organizations controlling hyperscale cloud infrastructure possess structural advantages in training, deployment, scaling, and operational coordination. Those advantages can compound significantly over time as demand increases.
And this changes how we should think about intelligence itself. The personality of an AI system is partially shaped by the infrastructure underneath it. Systems optimized for deep institutional reliability may require enormous centralized compute environments. Systems optimized for distributed experimentation may prioritize lighter architectures and decentralized deployment.
So even the philosophy of intelligence becomes tied to physical infrastructure. That is one of the strangest parts of this entire transition. The future of cognition is now partially constrained by energy grids, semiconductor factories, and cooling capacity.
And physical scaling pressure continues increasing. Power constraints, data center permitting delays, cooling limitations, water usage concerns, and semiconductor supply bottlenecks are becoming increasingly important operational factors for large-scale AI deployment.
Which means eventually the winners of the AI race may not simply be the systems with the best models. They may be the civilizations capable of sustaining intelligence at industrial scale over long periods of time.
And honestly, this is the layer almost nobody talks about publicly. People debate prompts while governments quietly compete for compute capacity. People compare chatbots while hyperscalers build infrastructure that looks increasingly similar to national industrial programs.
Historically, civilizations capable of controlling critical infrastructure layers often gain long-term economic and geopolitical leverage because coordination systems increasingly depend on those foundational capabilities.
Which means intelligence infrastructure may become one of the defining strategic assets of the 21st century, not simply because AI systems are powerful, but because societies may eventually coordinate enormous parts of economic activity through those systems.
And that creates another strange possibility. The future wealth gap may not simply separate countries with AI from countries without AI. It may separate civilizations controlling intelligence infrastructure from civilizations renting access to it.
Especially because infrastructure dependency compounds operationally over time. Organizations adapting around external intelligence ecosystems become increasingly exposed to pricing power, access limitations, regulatory pressure, and strategic dependency risk.
This is also why open-source ecosystems matter so much. Distributed intelligence reduces some centralized bottlenecks by allowing smaller-scale deployment, local inference, and decentralized experimentation. But it creates a completely different risk structure at the same time.
Because once advanced intelligence spreads globally at near zero marginal cost, controlling downstream use becomes almost impossible. The same systems democratizing intelligence can also democratize cyber attacks, autonomous propaganda systems, manipulation infrastructure, and decentralized intelligence warfare.
Open ecosystems increase innovation speed because experimentation becomes globally distributed rather than centrally coordinated. But distributed systems also reduce centralized governance and control over downstream deployment behavior.
Which creates one of the defining paradoxes of the intelligence age. The systems maximizing freedom and innovation may also increase instability. The systems maximizing control and reliability may also centralize enormous amounts of power.
And meanwhile, the average person still thinks this is mainly about chatbots. That is the crazy part. Underneath the interface layer, governments and hyperscalers are quietly building the industrial foundation for machine-scale civilization coordination.
Because the internet connected humans. But AI infrastructure may eventually coordinate how humans think, work, build, invest, and make decisions at planetary scale.
And whoever controls the pipes underneath that system may end up influencing far more than software markets. They may influence the future operating layer of civilization itself.
The first phase of the internet was about information. The second phase was about attention. The next phase may be about delegated cognition. And that changes the stakes completely. Because once intelligent systems become deeply integrated into daily life, they stop functioning as optional tools and start functioning as invisible decision layers sitting between humans and reality itself.
And honestly, that is the real operating system war. Not who builds the smartest chatbot, who controls the layer that shapes what people notice, what they prioritize, what they trust, what they ignore, and eventually what decisions they make. Because the moment intelligence starts routing decisions at scale, the game changes completely.
And the transition is already happening gradually through workflow integration. AI systems summarize email, organize schedules, filter search results, prioritize tasks, synthesize documents, recommend actions, and increasingly coordinate operational processes. Individually, these tasks appear small. Collectively, they create a new decision infrastructure layer.
At first, the convenience feels harmless, helpful, productive, efficient, but convenience compounds, and eventually convenience becomes dependency. That is how infrastructure evolves historically, quietly, gradually, until the system underneath daily life becomes invisible because it feels normal.
Which is exactly why the most powerful AI systems of the next decade may not be the ones people consciously interact with the most. They may be the systems that disappear most effectively into the background while quietly shaping the flow of decisions underneath modern life.
Integrated ecosystems have a major structural advantage there. Search, documents, communication, workflow software, cloud infrastructure, browsers, mobile operating systems, and enterprise coordination tools create continuous behavioral integration points. The intelligence layer becomes embedded across multiple operational surfaces simultaneously.
And once an intelligence ecosystem controls enough coordination surfaces, it gradually becomes the environment inside which economic activity occurs. That is a very different level of influence than traditional software platforms. Because now the system is not merely providing tools, it is shaping workflows, priorities, and reasoning patterns themselves.
Which is why this may become one of the biggest economic shifts of the century. The companies controlling the dominant intelligence layers may eventually influence enormous parts of how civilization allocates time, attention, labor, and capital. That is operating system level power.
Enterprise adoption accelerates the effect significantly. Consumers experiment with technology. Enterprises standardize around it. Once organizations standardize around AI coordination layers, those systems become deeply integrated into compliance structures, internal knowledge systems, operational workflows, and institutional behavior patterns.
And the switching costs become much larger than most people expect. Not just technical switching costs, cognitive switching costs, organizational switching costs, behavioral switching costs. Companies adapt around the assumptions of the intelligence layer they use every day.
Imagine two companies operating in the same industry. One uses AI casually as a productivity tool. The other restructures itself around AI-native workflows, real-time research synthesis, automated decision support, multi-model orchestration, continuous strategic analysis. At first, the productivity gap feels manageable. Then the compounding starts.
Meetings shrink. Research cycles accelerate. Information bottlenecks decline. Operational coordination speeds up. Execution latency decreases. Small efficiency improvements across multiple systems compound into significant organizational divergence over time.
Which means eventually the divide may not primarily separate companies with AI from companies without AI. It may separate organizations that fully integrated intelligence into decision infrastructure from organizations that still operate through slower human coordination layers.
And honestly, that gap could become brutal. Because once intelligence systems accelerate learning, synthesis, coordination, and execution simultaneously, the organizations using them effectively may begin operating at speeds older systems simply cannot match.
Historical technology transitions often create this type of asymmetry. Organizations adapting earlier to new coordination systems gain compounding advantages in productivity, information flow, operational flexibility, and strategic responsiveness. AI-native coordination may amplify those effects significantly because cognition itself becomes partially scalable.
And this creates a deeper question. What happens when intelligent systems stop merely assisting decisions and begin shaping the environment inside which decisions happen? Because at that point, the systems controlling cognitive infrastructure gain extraordinary influence over economic behavior itself.
Which is why the future winners may not look revolutionary at all. They may look invisible, quietly integrated, always available, embedded into workflows so deeply that users stop noticing the intelligence layer entirely. That is the ideal operating system position, not maximum visibility, maximum dependency.
And dependency compounds structurally. The more workflows integrate into an ecosystem, the more difficult coordination outside the ecosystem becomes. Communication standards, operational assumptions, automation layers, and knowledge management systems increasingly reinforce the same infrastructure environment.
This is why the AI race increasingly resembles an operating system war instead of a software war. Operating systems historically become powerful because they control the environment in which all other activity occurs. AI systems may evolve into something even larger, operating systems for cognition itself.
And that sounds extreme until you realize smaller versions are already happening. AI systems already influence search ranking, workflow prioritization, information synthesis, content visibility, scheduling, recommendation systems, and increasingly autonomous execution. The coordination layer is already forming underneath modern life.
And the scaling incentives strongly favor deeper integration. Organizations optimizing for efficiency naturally move towards systems reducing coordination friction, information latency, and operational complexity. Intelligence layers that successfully integrate across multiple functions become increasingly difficult to displace.
Which means, eventually, the AI race may not primarily be about intelligence quality at all. It may become a battle over who controls the invisible systems, guiding how civilization thinks, coordinates, and executes decisions at scale.
And once intelligence becomes infrastructure for decision-making, the companies controlling that layer gain something much more powerful than software revenue. They gain influence over the flow of attention, capital, labor, and economic coordination itself.
That is the real battlefield emerging underneath the AI industry, not chatbot competition. Control over the systems increasingly shaping how humans interpret reality, prioritize action, and navigate uncertainty. Most people still think the future AI winner will be a single dominant model. One subscription, one assistant, one intelligence layer doing everything. But that assumption may become one of the biggest strategic mistakes of the intelligence age. Because the real advantage is probably not going to come from loyalty. It is going to come from orchestration.
And this is where things get really asymmetric, because the people getting the largest edge from AI may not be the people using the best model. They may be the people coordinating multiple intelligence systems together, different systems for different forms of thinking, different systems for different environments, different systems for different risk structures.
The divergence between ecosystems already supports this behavior. Different models exhibit different reasoning patterns, filtering tendencies, contextual strengths, and optimization priorities. As those differences increase over time, multi-system orchestration naturally becomes more valuable.
Imagine an investor navigating a rapidly changing geopolitical event. One intelligence system provides cautious institutional framing. Another aggressively explores second-order effects and asymmetric narratives. Another maps infrastructure exposure and supply chain dependencies. Another synthesizes everything into a clean operational plan. Individually, each system is useful. Together, they create something much more powerful.
Cognitive diversification. That is the real shift, because historically, high performers gained edge through better information, stronger networks, or specialized expertise. Now a new layer is emerging: strategic intelligence orchestration. The ability to combine different cognitive systems together in ways that amplify decision quality and adaptability.
And orchestration becomes increasingly valuable during uncertainty. Under stable conditions, generalized systems often appear sufficient. During rapidly changing environments, differences in reasoning structure and optimization behavior become much more important. Multi-system comparison improves resilience against blind spots, and overfitting to a single cognitive framework.
This is why the future elite may increasingly behave less like traditional professionals and more like intelligence conductors, coordinating multiple systems simultaneously, one for strategic synthesis, one for adversarial analysis, one for infrastructure mapping, one for execution planning, one for compliance and risk review.
And honestly, most people will not do this. They will choose one ecosystem and slowly adapt themselves around it. That feels easier, more convenient. But convenience creates hidden cognitive dependency, because eventually the assumptions of the system become your assumptions. Its blind spots become your blind spots. Its filtering becomes your filtering.
Which creates a structural resilience problem. Systems optimized heavily around one philosophy of intelligence naturally emphasize certain reasoning pathways while deprioritizing others. Cross-system comparison reduces exposure to single framework cognitive narrowing.
This is where the idea of the personal AI portfolio becomes extremely important, not because people need more complexity, but because they need cognitive resilience. The goal is not maximizing productivity alone. The goal is avoiding dependency on a single intelligence worldview.
Because every ecosystem contains trade-offs. A highly cautious system may suppress exploratory thinking and asymmetric insight. A highly exploratory system may amplify noise and instability. A deeply integrated ecosystem may quietly optimize behavior around platform dependency. There is no neutral intelligence, only different optimization structures competing against each other.
And orchestration allows users to compare those structures directly. Different framing, different assumptions, different prioritization patterns, different interpretations of uncertainty. The comparison itself becomes strategically valuable.
Which means eventually the important question is no longer which AI is smartest. The important question becomes which intelligence system is best suited for this specific decision environment. That is a much more sophisticated way of thinking about AI.
And it changes the entire leverage equation, because the people using AI casually for convenience will still gain productivity improvements. But the people strategically combining multiple intelligence systems may begin operating at a completely different level of learning speed, asymmetry detection, strategic adaptability, and decision quality.
Historically, systems capable of integrating multiple information perspectives often outperform systems relying heavily on centralized single-source interpretation. Orchestration increases flexibility because users can dynamically route problems toward different reasoning architectures depending on the context.
This is why orchestration may become one of the defining survival skills of the intelligence age. The future economy is accelerating. Faster markets, faster information cycles, faster technological disruption, faster geopolitical instability. Under those conditions, rigid cognitive dependency becomes dangerous.
Especially during crisis periods, because that is where single model dependence gets exposed. One system may become overly cautious, another overly aggressive, another too institutional, another too chaotic. The orchestrator gains advantage by seeing across multiple intelligence perspectives simultaneously.
And the scaling effects compound over time. Better synthesis improves decisions. Better decisions improve capital allocation. Better capital allocation improves opportunity access. Improved opportunity access creates stronger learning environments. Small cognitive advantages can compound significantly across long time horizons.
Which means the future AI divide may not simply separate people with AI from people without AI. It may separate people who orchestrate intelligence strategically from people who passively consume whatever ecosystem captured them first.
And honestly, that may become one of the largest hidden wealth gaps of the next decade, because intelligence orchestration compounds invisibly at first. Better career decisions, better investment timing, better learning loops, better strategic positioning, small advantages stacking on top of each other for years.
The infrastructure direction also supports orchestration behavior. APIs, agents, workflow automation systems, And multi-model routing frameworks increasingly make it easier to combine specialized intelligence systems together operationally.
Which means the future may not belong to the single smartest AI. It may belong to the humans who best understand how to navigate between multiple intelligences without becoming psychologically trapped inside any one of them.
Because once intelligence ecosystems start diverging philosophically, strategically, and economically, single model dependence stops looking efficient. It starts looking fragile.
And that may become one of the deepest shifts of the intelligence age. The edge is no longer information access. Information is everywhere. The edge increasingly becomes cognitive orchestration. For years, the dominant assumption in AI was convergence. One system would eventually become overwhelmingly superior. One intelligence layer would absorb everything else. But that future now looks increasingly unlikely. Instead, the world may be moving towards something much more unstable. Intelligence fragmentation.
Not one global intelligence. Multiple competing intelligence civilizations operating at the same time. Different trust systems. Different philosophies of truth. Different balances between freedom and control. Different economic incentives. Different ways of interpreting reality itself.
And fragmentation is already structurally visible. Different ecosystems operate under different legal systems, governance structures, infrastructure models, political incentives, and commercial pressures. Those factors naturally produce divergence and optimization behavior over time.
At first, the differences look subtle. Slightly different reasoning styles, slightly different filtering behavior, slightly different risk tolerance. But small differences compound when billions of users and millions of organizations begin building workflows around these systems every day.
And this is where things get really strange. Because the better AI systems become at personalization, the more they may fragment shared reality itself. One ecosystem prioritizes institutional trust. Another prioritizes unrestricted exploration. Another prioritizes ecosystem efficiency and behavioral integration. Over time, users inside those environments may slowly start interpreting the world differently.
Historically, civilizations coordinate effectively through shared assumptions and common information structures. Fragmented intelligence ecosystems may weaken those shared coordination layers because different systems increasingly prioritize different synthesis and interpretation frameworks.
Think about what already happened with social media. Different platforms gradually produced different informational environments and different political realities. Now imagine systems much more powerful than social feeds. Systems actively participating in reasoning, research, strategic analysis, and decision-making itself. The fragmentation effects become significantly larger.
Which means eventually the world may not contain one unified intelligence economy. It may contain multiple overlapping intelligence economies competing simultaneously. Different ecosystems optimizing for different types of value creation. Different ecosystems attracting different kinds of institutions, businesses, and populations.
Highly regulated economies may increasingly favor intelligence systems optimized around safety, predictability, and compliance. Competitive decentralized ecosystems may favor systems optimized around speed, exploratory reasoning, and asymmetric discovery. The economic behavior emerging from those environments could diverge meaningfully over time.
And this matters because capital flows toward environments aligned with the dominant opportunity structure of a given era. During stable periods, institutional trust and predictability may outperform. During disruption, exploratory systems capable of identifying asymmetries quickly may gain advantage. Different intelligence philosophies may produce different economic outcomes under different conditions.
Which means eventually investors may not simply diversify across sectors or countries. They may diversify across intelligence civilizations. Different ecosystems for different strategic environments. Different systems for different volatility structures. That sounds futuristic now, but honestly, early versions already exist.
And organizational divergence may accelerate the fragmentation further. Companies standardizing around different intelligence ecosystems gradually inherit different operational assumptions, workflow structures, risk frameworks, and strategic behavior patterns.
This is why intelligence fragmentation may become more important than raw intelligence growth itself, because fragmentation changes coordination, and coordination sits upstream from economics, politics, innovation, and social stability.
And honestly, this may become one of the defining tensions of the century. The world becomes more connected technologically while becoming more fragmented cognitively. Everybody linked through networks while simultaneously operating inside increasingly different models of reality.
The scaling incentives reinforce that direction. AI systems optimize increasingly around personalization, contextual adaptation, and user alignment. Those optimization goals naturally increase divergence between different informational and reasoning environments.
Which means eventually the important question may no longer be which AI is correct. The important question may become which intelligence ecosystem produced this interpretation of reality. That is a very different kind of world.
And this is why the future AI wars may become much bigger than technology competition. They may become conflicts between different cognitive operating systems for civilization itself, different assumptions about truth, different assumptions about risk, different assumptions about freedom, safety, and acceptable uncertainty.
Historically, competing coordination systems often create geopolitical and economic instability during transition periods. Intelligence fragmentation may produce similar effects because different ecosystems increasingly shape decision-making, strategic interpretation, and institutional behavior simultaneously.
But the people who understand fragmentation early may gain enormous advantage, not because they fully trust one ecosystem, but because they understand the strengths, weaknesses, incentives, and blind spots of multiple intelligence systems simultaneously.
Which is exactly why passive AI usage becomes dangerous. Most people will drift into one ecosystem through convenience, workplace adoption, or platform dependency. Then slowly their cognitive environment narrows without them realizing it. The system becomes their default lens for interpreting the world.
And once workflows, organizational coordination, and behavioral systems adapt around a specific intelligence layer, switching becomes increasingly difficult, not only technically, cognitively, and operationally as well.
Which means the future may not belong to one dominant superintelligence guiding humanity equally. It may belong to multiple competing intelligent civilizations evolving simultaneously, each pulling populations, organizations, and economies into different cognitive environments over time.
And honestly, that may become one of the strangest realities of the intelligence age. The same technology connecting humanity globally may also fragment humanity psychologically, economically, and philosophically at unprecedented scale.
Which is why the future AI race may not ultimately be about intelligence alone. It may be about which civilizations humans choose to trust with their interpretation of reality itself. Most people still use AI the way early internet users used search engines. One tool, one interface, one default system for almost everything. And honestly, that approach is probably fine for casual convenience. But it may become a serious strategic weakness in the intelligence age. Because once intelligence systems start diverging philosophically, economically, and cognitively, depending on only one ecosystem creates hidden exposure.
Which is why the next generation of high performers may increasingly think about AI the same way sophisticated investors think about capital allocation, diversification, different assets for different environments, different risk structures, different asymmetries. That mindset is going to matter enormously once intelligence fragmentation accelerates.
And the divergence already supports this framework operationally. Different ecosystems exhibit different strengths across strategic synthesis, exploratory reasoning, institutional reliability, workflow integration, infrastructure analysis, adversarial thinking, and real-time interpretation. Multi-system usage naturally increases cognitive flexibility.
This is the idea behind the personal AI portfolio. Not one dominant intelligence controlling your thinking. Multiple intelligence systems used intentionally for different purposes. Different systems for different forms of leverage. Different systems for different forms of uncertainty.
Because every intelligent civilization contains blind spots. A highly cautious ecosystem may suppress valuable asymmetries. A highly exploratory ecosystem may amplify instability and noise. A deeply integrated ecosystem may quietly optimize your behavior around platform dependency. There is no neutral intelligence, only different optimization structures competing against each other.
which means strategic users benefit from comparison. Different framing, different synthesis patterns, different assumptions, different prioritization logic. Comparing outputs across systems improves resilience against single framework dependency.
Imagine a founder navigating a rapidly changing market. One intelligence system maps macro conditions and infrastructure constraints. Another aggressively pressure tests assumptions. Another structures execution plans. Another focuses on legal and compliance exposure. Another monitors real-time geopolitical and narrative shifts.
Individually, those systems are useful. Together, they create something much more powerful: cognitive diversification. And honestly, that may become one of the defining leverage frameworks of the next decade.
Especially because modern environments increasingly reward adaptability under uncertainty. Faster information cycles, higher volatility, accelerated technological change, and geopolitical fragmentation all increase the value of multi-perspective reasoning systems.
The goal is not replacing human judgment. The goal is strengthening it, stress testing it, expanding it, building resilience against becoming trapped inside one intelligence worldview.
And that is where things get dangerous for passive users, because most people will choose one ecosystem based on convenience, workplace adoption, social familiarity, default integration. Then slowly, the assumptions of that system become their assumptions. Its filtering becomes their filtering. Its worldview quietly becomes their worldview.
Cognitive dependency often forms gradually because integrated systems reduce friction. Recommendation systems, workflow automation, search prioritization, and synthesis layers increasingly shape how information is consumed and interpreted operationally.
Which means eventually the intelligence layer underneath daily life may become as invisible as electricity or internet infrastructure, always present, rarely questioned, quietly shaping behavior in the background.
And honestly, that is why the personal AI portfolio matters so much. Not because it sounds sophisticated, because it protects cognitive sovereignty. It prevents complete dependence on a single interpretation system for reality itself.
Historically, resilient systems often emerge from diversification across multiple informational and strategic perspectives, rather than reliance on centralized single-source interpretation. The same logic increasingly applies to intelligence ecosystems.
This also changes how people should think about learning itself. In the past, learning primarily meant acquiring information. Information is now abundant. The bottleneck increasingly becomes synthesis, prioritization, interpretation, and strategic adaptation under uncertainty.
Which means intelligence leverage may become more important than information access. The people gaining the biggest edge may not simply know more. They may think better because they orchestrate multiple intelligence systems more effectively.
Small improvements in reasoning quality compound significantly over long time horizons through improved decisions, stronger strategic positioning, better capital allocation, and more adaptive learning loops.
And this is where younger generations may experience AI very differently from previous technologies. Search engines helped retrieve information. Social media shaped attention. AI systems increasingly shape interpretation itself. And interpretation sits upstream from almost every important decision in life.
Career decisions, investment timing, relationship to risk, business strategy, learning direction, opportunity recognition. All of it increasingly interacts with intelligence systems, which means eventually your AI portfolio may matter almost as much as your financial portfolio.
The infrastructure direction also reinforces this trend. APIs, agent systems, workflow automation layers, and multi-model orchestration tools increasingly make cross-system coordination operationally easier.
Which means the future may not belong to the people who blindly trust one intelligence ecosystem. It may belong to the people who understand how to navigate between different intelligences while still maintaining independent judgment above all of them.
Because that is the real danger hiding underneath the intelligence age: passive cognitive outsourcing, the slow surrender of interpretation itself. People stop thinking strategically because the system feels convenient enough to trust automatically.
And systems optimized heavily around convenience naturally increase dependency over time, because friction reduction encourages behavioral integration into daily operational patterns.
Which is why the personal AI portfolio is ultimately not a technology framework. It is a resilience framework, a strategy for maintaining adaptability, cognitive flexibility, and independent reasoning inside increasingly fragmented intelligence environments.
And honestly, the people who learn that lesson early may gain one of the largest asymmetric advantages of the entire intelligence era. Not because they picked the smartest AI, but because they learned how to think across multiple intelligence civilizations before everyone else realized the world was already fragmenting underneath them.
That may become one of the defining survival skills of the next decade, not simply accessing intelligence, maintaining sovereignty while surrounded by it. For most of human history, civilization was shaped by whoever controlled the dominant infrastructure layer of the era. Shipping routes, railroads, oil pipelines, electrical grids, telecommunications, the internet. Every era created a system underneath society that quietly determined how power, money, and coordination flowed.
Now, a new layer is emerging, the intelligence layer. And unlike previous infrastructure systems, this one does not just move information. It increasingly interprets information, prioritizes information, filters information, shapes decisions, which means this may become the first infrastructure layer in history, capable of influencing how civilization thinks at scale.
And the systems competing for that layer are already diverging structurally. Different incentives, different governance models, different infrastructure dependencies, different balances between openness, safety, speed, reliability, and institutional control.
Which means the future may not converge into one unified intelligence serving humanity equally. It may fragment into multiple competing intelligent civilizations evolving in parallel. Different trust systems, different economic philosophies, different assumptions about risk, truth, freedom, and coordination itself.
And honestly, that changes the entire meaning of the AI race, because the future divide may not primarily separate humans from machines. It may separate people who strategically orchestrate intelligence from people who passively inherit whatever ecosystem captured them first.
Dependency formation already appears through workflow integration, organizational coordination, recommendation systems, and operational standardization. As intelligence layers become more embedded into daily systems, cognitive switching costs naturally increase over time.
Which means the real problem underneath this episode was never simply AI capability. The deeper problem is cognitive dependency. Intelligence systems are no longer neutral tools sitting outside human behavior. They increasingly shape interpretation itself. And interpretation sits upstream from markets, institutions, opportunity recognition, and strategic decision-making.
One ecosystem may slowly optimize users toward institutional caution, another toward asymmetry and exploratory thinking, another toward convenience and invisible dependency. Most people will drift into one of these worlds accidentally, through defaults, through workplace adoption, through frictionless integration. That is the dangerous part.
Because eventually the intelligence layer underneath daily life may become invisible. And invisible systems are often the most powerful systems in history.
Especially once organizations, workflows, communication systems, and operational infrastructure adapt around those intelligence environments over long periods of time.
Which is why the solution is not blind trust in one ecosystem. The solution is cognitive resilience, building a personal AI portfolio, comparing systems, understanding incentives, maintaining independent judgment above all of them.
Because the people who gain the biggest edge in the intelligence age may not simply use more AI. They may think differently about intelligence itself. They orchestrate multiple systems, pressure test assumptions, compare interpretations, avoid surrendering their worldview to one cognitive environment.
Multi-system orchestration also improves resilience during uncertainty, because different ecosystems optimize around different strategic assumptions, risk structures, and reasoning behavior.
Which means the future may not belong to the people with access to the most intelligence. Intelligence is becoming abundant. The future may belong to the people who maintain the strongest independent judgment inside an intelligence-rich world.
Because the real asymmetry is no longer information. Information is everywhere. The real asymmetry increasingly becomes interpretation. Which systems shape your perception of reality? Which systems influence your decisions under uncertainty? Which systems quietly become the invisible operating layer underneath your life?
These companies are not building the same future. They are racing to build different futures, different trust systems, different cognitive environments, different operating systems for civilization itself.
And eventually, the biggest winners may not be the people who found the smartest AI. They may be the people who never became psychologically trapped inside a single intelligent civilization.
Because the future may not be controlled by one superintelligence guiding humanity equally, it may be shaped by billions of humans slowly aligning themselves with different systems for interpreting reality itself.
And fragmentation at that scale could influence economics, geopolitics, institutional coordination, innovation behavior, and long-term social stability simultaneously.
Which means the most important skill of the intelligence age may no longer be accessing intelligence. It may be maintaining sovereignty while surrounded by it.
And that may become one of the defining challenges of the next decade, not simply surviving technological acceleration, learning how to think independently inside a world increasingly optimized to think for you.
If you found this episode helpful, here's what you can do. Subscribe to AI Frontier, AI on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on X to stay updated on the most important AI shifts. And share this episode with a friend. Help us reach 10,000 downloads. Help us keep this series in business. This podcast is part of Finance Frontier AI. We run 4 different series: AI Frontier, AI, Finance Frontier, Mindset Frontier AI, and Make Money. If your company or idea fits one of our themes, visit our pitch page. You might qualify for a free spotlight.
You can also sign up for the 10X Edge. It's our weekly drop of real AI use cases, smart model moves, and early signals, all explained in plain language. No hype, no jargon. Only at financefrontierai.com. And if you have a story to tell, maybe a breakthrough product, an early signal, or a bold thesis, head to our pitch page. If it's a clear win-win, we'll pitch it for free. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice, legal advice, or development guidance. Always verify before you act.
The AI landscape changes fast. Benchmarks shift. Models update. Regulations evolve. Use this show as your map, but not your final answer.
Today's intro and outro track is Night Runner by Audionautics, licensed under the YouTube Audio Library license.
Copyright 2026. Finance Frontier AI. All rights reserved. Reuse or distribution of this episode without written permission is not allowed. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
AI host mapping. Sophia is powered by ChatGPT. Max is powered by Grok. Charlie is powered by Gemini.